again dashing the hopes of Nigerians that this cash scarcity would ease off really soon. Now, while the CBN announced on Monday that the old 1,500 and 200 naira banknotes would remain legal tender alongside the newly redesigned notes up until the 31st of December, in compliance with the Supreme Court judgment. Many bank branches, however, have remained shut across the country, and those that have opened have had to ration the cash supply to customers. Hmm.
Okay, thank you, Zibby. So we're here now, and this is one of the outcomes from the Supreme Court ruling that I feared would come to pass. Now, as we're all aware, the Supreme Court had ordered that the 200 naira, 500 naira, and 1000 naira banknotes, the old designs, should continue to remain legal tender side by side or alongside with the newly redesigned 200, 500, and 1000 naira banknotes. Now, it must be understood that at the point in time during the arguments, the CBN had represented that it had disposed of a lot of the old notes that had been submitted to it through the banks and through people who went to the CBN offices in various states.
Mm.
But the Supreme Court still gave that considered ruling, that considered order. Now, the CBN has since indicated that it will comply by issuing a circular directing the banks to proceed to transact with the 500 naira and 1000 naira banknotes for their customers. But we're here now because apparently the banks have exhausted the stock or the quantity of the old 500 naira and 1000 naira banknotes that they had in their possession. And there's been no supply from the central bank, apparently.
Mm.
Now, we don't know where we are with the supply of the newly designed 1000 naira, 500 naira, and 200 naira banknotes. So the bigger question is, what is at play here? Because the governor of the central bank had already indicated that he wasn't comfortable with the previous total money in supply in circulation, which was then 3.2 trillion. And feelers suggest that he's looking at a band between 1.5 trillion or 2 trillion max for money in circulation in Nigeria. So the CBN now has to tell us what the plan is. Since the old notes are seemingly finished for now, and
Mm.
the supply of the new notes is seemingly on hold or on pause, what exactly is going on? Given the fact that a number of the banks are having serious challenges with money transfers. So there are replete accounts narratives of people transferring large sums, medium sums, small sums, and then the sums seemingly are trapped in between banks.
Mm.
And this has gone on for far too long. Now, it will be interesting what the CBN does because the banks right now are hindered, they're hampered. Why? The infrastructure is inadequate to deal with the increased demand. You must remember now that the volume of people who are now doing digital transactions has probably doubled or even tripled. You then have to tack on the fact that a lot of experienced IT personnel in the banks have left. They've left for greener pastures. So the people left behind are not that experienced, are not that skilled, and are finding it extremely difficult coping with increased demand. You then have the challenge of internet service penetration and coverage. So it's a very frustrating combination, it's a very frustrating mix, and
Mm.
the CBN has to intervene quickly so that Nigerians can start to heave a sigh of relief. Because if that isn't done, the effect on the economy will be tragic because already a lot of small and small businesses have started to shut down because continue to cope because the bulk of their revenue comes from cash. Their capital is also cash based and they rely on a quick turnover. So when that doesn't happen, it's a huge hotness.
Okay, so where does this security printing and minting company come in? Because I mean, if we've had this shortage for so long, surely someone somewhere should be thinking about perhaps printing more and putting in circulation.
So So I think it's a number of things, right? So the Security and Printing Minting Company made representations to the president that they had the ability to print sufficient quantities of the banknotes. Now, what we hear off the record is they can't do it, at least for now. And that we're probably looking at least a 10 to 12 month period before new ones. Yeah, off the record.
Hmm.
And insiders that suggest that there hasn't been production there for a while. So it's just interesting because we're not getting the officially, publicly, we're not getting the right information. But if you
Hmm.
can tap contacts off the record, you
Right.
start to get a clearer picture of what's going on behind the scenes. So I think what they're doing is they want to get this election out of the way, and then maybe we'll see some traction. So let's see what the CBN starts to do from next week, now that the governorship elections would have been out of the way since they're going to be conducted on Saturday.
All right, we've got some messages coming through. Pastor Dakmo says possible shortage of old Naira notes from some video evidence on social media. Plenty of the old Naira notes may have already been shredded and disposed of. We are notorious for jumping the gun at the start line in Nigeria. Now, if these notes truly have been disposed of, that would in some way make sense, right? Because the CBN would have to deal with storing money that is no longer valid. So it might make sense in some way that they were disposed of. Just saying.
No, so just to quickly address that, about 2.1 trillion re-entered the system. Now, 2.1 trillion now worth of physical banknotes is a lot, and its storage space in each of the CBN vaults is limited. So it only makes sense that they would have had to dispose of most of it, if not all of it, because remember the banks have a cash reserve ratio, and every day they are required to keep a certain amount of cash in the vault. Anything above that, they get penalized for it. So they're making that's why you see all those bullion vans moving up and down the city because they're either taking cash back to the CBN vault
Mm.
or they're bringing cash from the CBN vault. So it's just interesting.
All right, Dami from Ikorodu says, let us all remember that the current crisis was completely unavoidable if only we have proper policy formulation and implementation protocols. That the CBN has doubled down on this failed policy is another symptom of Nigeria's failed leadership. Let's go on to the next story. And this story actually, I'm just trying to scroll up to get that one. Um, okay, so this story actually comes from Daily Trust and it has to do with the subsidy removal. Now, the federal government says no conclusion has been reached on how to lessen the likely impact of the proposed fuel subsidy removal on the citizenry as it prepares to do away with petroleum product subsidy from the middle of 2023.
Well, this is a bit disappointing considering that we have about 3 months left to the end of the proposed fuel subsidy removal. Um, so, an estimated budget of about 3.3 trillion naira had been earmarked for fuel subsidy between January and June. And if we think about if we assume that that amount would have also covered for subsidy from July to December, then we have an idea of the quantity of money available to have done alternative projects to cushion the fuel subsidy removal. Right now, it's March, 3 months to the fuel subsidy, 2.5 months to the proposed handover. It's, in my opinion, it's very unlikely that they are focusing strictly on this because most of everybody's probably in handover mode as of now. And it's interesting to note that they've been discussing this for almost a year and they still haven't come up with um, any tangible alternatives. So I'm wondering at what point will they decide on what to do? At what point will they put together the structures and the systems that will support whatever palliatives it is that will be introduced from 1st of July?
Mm.
So, then we begin to ask, is there really a plan to remove the fuel subsidy? If there's no plan as of today of what palliatives will be on offer once the fuel subsidy is removed. So those are the questions, and like I said, everybody's practically in handover mode now. I'm not quite sure that enough attention will be paid to um, fashioning out what the palliatives are. Perhaps they're even trying to pass that on to the new government. If that's the case, then the new government will have only 1 month left to decide on that, and we know that's practically
Right.
impossible.
Mm. All right, let's look at a few messages coming through. Abbas says the Supreme Court should not be blamed if the banks have exhausted the notes with them. In fact, that judgment doused the whole lot of tension and saved us from bigger crises that could have occurred. The CBN should come out clean. Joseph Mengi says it's really unfortunate that the CBN governor and his policies have caused the nation inflation at an all-time high, economic meltdown, business closures. It's obvious that money bags are in possession of the new notes, which they aren't going to release into the economy. Where do we go from here? Now the banks are deceiving customers that they don't have cash anymore. Okay, I don't really understand that. I don't know if it's quite accurate. So yeah, you might want to rephrase. Dan Okuda says, why is the president insensitive to the pains Nigerians are going through? Let's move on to this article from The Guardian. Now, officials of the Nigeria Immigration Service have pleaded with the Comptroller General to offset their election duty allowances, else they would boycott the weekend's governorship and House of Assembly polls. Now, the personnel under the aegis of concerned staff of the NIS claimed that they were owed perks and allowances.
Okay, thank you, Zibby. So I read the story and I was a bit confused. I understand what the police and the military do on election day. I'm not sure what the immigration officials do on election day because the borders are supposed to be shut anyways. And if they're at their border points, why are we paying almost everyone in the Nigerian Immigration Service amounts of money? So 70,000 for the officers, 30,000 for the junior members of the service. So it's a big question, and if anyone knows what they even do on election day, I'd love to hear it, because I've never seen any of the officials at any polling unit or any collation center. So what exactly do they do that there's even an allowance made out for them? Now that's not the only one. There's another security group, the civil defense guys. They also get election allowances. Again, what do they do? Because there's no movement on election day. I don't see them. I've not seen any footage of them at any of the election polling units or the collation center. I see the officers when results are being announced. So what exactly is going on? Now they say they haven't been paid. That is the allegation of the rank and file. But the spokesperson for the Nigerian Immigration Service simply said they had sent the money to the banks, and the banks were responsible for crediting the account of the rank and file. Now that is one of the laziest responses I will ever hear in my life. A specific allegation has been made, and you give that general vague statement. Now, if you gave the instructions to the bank and you asked them to pay, did you follow up to ensure that they were paid? Are you waiting till the nation is embarrassed and then you start the buck passing game? So, well, where we are, there's a lot of indiscipline, there's a lot of mediocrity in the Nigerian public space. And I dare say it extends to the immigration service. And beyond the election allowances, they're even complaining about regular allowances. So they say an inspector of immigration gets about 80,000 naira a month, while his counterpart in the Nigerian Customs Service makes 200,000. So they're trying to justify their corruption, that they're not being paid properly and it's very demoralizing. They're not being promoted when they should be, and that it looks as if they're wasting their time working in the immigration service. Now, again, it speaks volumes to the sort of leadership we have in some of our institutions and how they get in. It speaks to the absence of strong systems that encourage accountability, that encourage transparency, that encourage due process being followed at every point of the way.
Biokolo says immigration officers man the borders on election day. People are stationed at the border to ensure compliance. International flights arrive at night on election day. Who receives them? Well, they would be there any other day, wouldn't they? All right, let's take a quick break. We'll continue the conversation on the other side. This is Freshly Pressed on Smooth 98.1.
Nice. Be sure.
This is Smooth 98.1.
Zibby.
My radio
Thank
always
you.
stays up to Smooth 98.1.
I'll take it once we're done with this segment.
Sorry?
I'll take it after this segment.
Yeah. I just realized I have more in the car. So,
What?
Are the border how many immigration officials say?
yeah, but that's their normal work.
I don't know, but how many
So,
I don't so that's their normal work. So why are they collecting fresh?
exactly, that's what I'm wondering. As in,
Nigeria is just a trip, honestly.
Because I mean, day or night, that's their job. They should be there. So it's not like they're doing anything extra. I'm confused. Okay, I'm gonna go and read this. This is how we just pay people money for the jobs that they are already doing.
Even the military, why are we paying anyone, to be honest? The police are paying the same. Like, so duty. What? I don't understand. It's still true.
Okay, so someone says immigration personnel were deployed to augment on armed security personnel deployed to polling units. Never
isn't
seen
that
this.
allegedly what NSCDC?
Two were deployed at my polling unit on election day. Same applies to NSCDC prison.
So do we pay prison Nigerian Correction Service? Do we pay them in election rounds?
We would have
So
to
that-
pay them if that's what's happening.
So that prisoners will not.
Smooth 98.1, love music, love life. This is Freshly Pressed. We're looking at the news stories making the headlines across the nation. The WhatsApp number to let us know what your thoughts are is 0809 444 0981. You can also tweet at Smooth981. We're also streaming live on YouTube. Just search for Smooth981 on YouTube, catch the live stream, and you can also post a comment on there as well. We're going on to a story from Punch, and this has to do with the Lagos train crash. Now, Professor Akin Abayomi, the Lagos State Commissioner for Health, says 66 patients involved in the train collision have been treated and discharged from 5 state public health facilities. He disclosed this in a situation update on Wednesday. Now, the incident happened on a very tragic note, really, and total number of patients as of today, which was when he gave this update, are just 26.
Okay, it's been about a week since well, exactly a week, because it was last week, Thursday, that it happened. And, you know, I appreciate, I'd like to say that I appreciate how the Lagos State Emergency Services and Health Services rose up quickly to be able to address the do I say casualties? Or the people who, you know, were involved in the accident. You know, but then I also think, you know, how ready are they for other emergency like situations? You know, so I've heard some people say, and you know, it's not like a thought that I would necessarily entertain, that because we're in election season, everybody has been up and running, you know, to be able to blah blah blah. If you understand what I mean, you know. But I just wonder if you know, if this is how it is normally. I know that in previous cases when we've had, for example, like building collapses or some other tragedies, the emergency management services, I think last summer, yeah, has always been you know, quite up to it, with health facilities as well. But then I also remember, you know, with the should I say the depletion in our health workers, you know, I can imagine the amount of stress or the amount of work involved, you know, with those who are currently there having to manage this emergency and with their daily jobs as well. So it's quite commendable. A total of about 102 people were involved in the accident, or 85 in the bus and 17 were in the area. And they reported that 6 people have died since then. So it's pretty commendable that they've been able to provide emergency care across, I think, about 3 or 4 public hospitals within this 1 week period.
All right, let's take some messages coming through. Ajayi says the excuses of exhausting the old Naira notes by commercial banks within 2 days of compliance with the Supreme Court order is still disobedience of the court order in another form. CBN must comply fully with the order. Okay, and let's move on to this message. Okay, let's just go on to our story. And don't forget, you can let us know what your thoughts are. 0809 4440981. From the Daily Trust, the federal government has confirmed that the population census, which is earlier scheduled for the 29th to, I believe, the 4th of April, so will now hold in May 2023. Now, the census is scheduled to hold from 3rd of May to 7th of May, and it is a recommendation that has been submitted to the president. And according to this source, a staff member of the commission, he says the president is going to approve it anyway, but it's yet to be decided.
Okay, so thank you, Zibby. It's still a bit baffling that there's little to no news about this census, and I only just stumbled onto it recently. So the initial plan was to hold it from, I think, the 3rd to the 7th of April, and then they say they're postponing it because of the elections. That doesn't make any sense because the elections should have long been concluded, and we knew the election dates from last year, so that simply makes no sense. Now they've moved it to May, and it's scheduled now to hold from the 3rd to the 7th of May. The first question or the first challenge I have: can we conduct a reliable, credible census in 5 days in Nigeria?
Hmm.
That's a big challenge. Then I see here that 2.8 billion naira has been approved to procure software for the conduct of the census. 2.8 billion at the official rate of using 450 naira is $6.2 million. Please, for the love of everything good, who wrote the software? How are you paying 6.2 million US dollars for software? How many computers will this software be loaded onto? How many devices? So there's always a deliberate attempt to provide incomplete information. How is this? So what is the name of this? So what exactly is going on? We had the census in 2006. The software that was used then, was it ever updated? Was it upgraded?
I mean, that was 17 years
Yes,
ago?
17 years. But I want to believe whoever wrote that software is still in business. You go back to them, okay, can you give us a new version? Rather than buying it afresh, they'll give it to you at a discounted fee. So there are a lot of question marks around this. I'm not sure they can get it done in 5 days.
Hmm.
Considering the large terrain of Nigeria and the fact that some places are a bit more challenging to get to,
Hmm.
and then with the level of insecurity in the land currently. Because we've been reading this week that Boko Haram, ISWAP, bandits, terrorists, they've all resumed. It was as if they went on spring break or something and they're back.
Well, it could also have something to do with not enough money being in circulation, which was, of course, one of the original ideas of this Naira redesign policy.
So now that you say it, funny enough, I was reading an article yesterday and it did point out that kidnappings are down this year. I think mainly because there's no cash and they don't want to collect an electronic transfer. So they're trying to minimize their stress and maximize the gain. Crazy.
Wow. All right. Gary says, why do we continue to put the inability of banks to provide digital services to Jacques syndrome? It's IT. Their services can still be employed no matter the geographic location. The banks just don't want to pay for the right services. Most of my company's clients, top IT personnel are overseas. And Gary actually has a point. But I had issues with a particular bank that I now will no longer use from maybe October last year. And the excuse that one of the top execs gave me was, oh, a lot of the staff have left the country. That was how many months ago? 6 months ago.
So Zibby, let me just give you a quick tip and I'll say it online. If your bank is monkeying around, just tell them you will write the director of banking supervision and everyone will sit up.
Thank you for that tip. I will use it on this now X bank. Okay, let's see. Chibuza says, Zibby, do you get allowances for working on election days? Unless it's outside normal business, it's business as usual. It's typical Nigeria. Yes, thank you, Adiola. I feel much better. He says, how are banks involved in payment of allowances? Are the paramilitary not paid via TSA? And let's see, OMT says, OMT, this is a really nice message, but it's really long. Unfortunately, we might not have enough time to read that. But let's go on to this from the Daily Post. Now, the National Bureau of Statistics said the country's headline inflation rate rose to 21.91% in February compared to 21.82 last month. And that shows a 0.09% increase in inflation rates. And this report is coming as the country is still continuing to face the crisis caused by the naira scarcity.
Okay, very quickly because we have little time.
Mm.
When we talk about inflation, what always just comes to my mind is the price of what I bought yesterday. Is it the same as what it's going for today, and what's it likely to be tomorrow? As it is, you know, if whatever you say about inflation outside, the ordinary man will ask you, I bought this XYZ amount yesterday. Can I buy it for that same price today, or can I buy it cheaper? Now, aside from that, there's also, do I even have the money to buy that? So those are the kind of things that that concern the ordinary man, not necessarily the inflation rate. Yeah, the figures might look like an improvement in some cases, but in reality, are we getting more for what we have? Do we have access to cash to be able to buy what it is that we want to buy? And then looking ahead into the future, coming at considering that the full subsidy will also be removed, what impact will that have on the inflation rate? What impact will that have on consumer prices of the basic goods that we buy, food, transportation, housing, all of those things? Those are some of the things that we also need to look at.
Mm. All right. Dr. I says the response by the Lagos state government didn't meet normal standards for handling mass casualty events. This was just one bus with less than 50 people and management was sloppy. I'm more interested in finding out the cause of the accidents and sanctions meted out. That should be easier, I hope. Olabode says, please, what is this rush about the census, especially when they say the country is broke? This looks like another abracadabra to further deplete the country's wealth. Abbas says, can't we see the reduction of kidnapping to the efforts of our military? We need to look beyond the other narratives we give. Our military is working hard every day. And Uche from Isolo says, I've been shaking my head since I heard the news of Census software price. Are they buying a tech company? And Austin, I like that you contribute to the show, but your messages are always rather divisive, and those are not the kind of messages that we encourage here at Smooth FM or any Nigerian should encourage as well. All right, that is all the time that we have for Freshly Pressed this morning. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your messages. And of course, special thanks to our analysts, Mr. C and Gbugbemi, for joining us this morning.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. I did find it excellent.
Wait,